The fundamental principle of avoidance psychology operates on scarcity and abundance dynamics that create predictable patterns of desire and disinterest. When you consistently provide love, attention, and emotional availability to an avoidant partner, you create psychological abundance that allows them to take your presence for granted while maintaining emotional distance. However, when you systematically withdraw your love and create genuine emotional scarcity, you trigger their deepest psychological needs and force them to confront the value of what they're losing, often resulting in desperate attempts to regain what they can no longer access. The psychology of scarcity: why avoidants value what they can't have. Avoidant attachment patterns are fundamentally rooted in fear-based responses to emotional overwhelm and loss of control, but they operate through a sophisticated psychological system that craves what appears to be moving away while losing interest in what remains consistently available. This paradoxical pattern stems from their deep-seated belief that anything freely given must be worthless, while anything difficult to obtain holds tremendous value. The scarcity principle activates their competitive psychology, triggering unconscious drives to pursue and capture what appears to be slipping away from their grasp. During your relationship, your consistent emotional availability created psychological safety that allowed them to maintain distance without fear of losing access to your love. This security enabled their avoidant patterns while eliminating the urgency that typically motivates pursuit and investment. When you create genuine scarcity by withdrawing your love and emotional availability, you disrupt their sense of control and force them to confront the possibility of permanent loss. This disruption activates their attachment system in ways that consistent availability never could, because their psychology is wired to respond to threat and challenge rather than security and consistency. The neurochemical aspects of this dynamic involve the same reward systems that create addiction, where intermittent and unpredictable rewards generate stronger psychological responses than consistent gratification. Your withdrawal of love creates psychological hunger that makes your attention feel more valuable and desirable than it did when it was freely available. Their competitive instincts emerge when they realize they're no longer winning the relationship game by being the less invested partner. The power dynamic that allowed them to maintain control shifts dramatically when you withdraw your emotional investment, forcing them to either accept loss or increase their own investment to restore balance. The scarcity you create also challenges their fundamental assumptions about their own desirability and importance. When someone who previously pursued them begins to withdraw and lose interest, it forces them to question whether they're as valuable and irreplaceable as they assumed, triggering insecurity that motivates increased effort to restore their sense of worth. Most importantly, emotional scarcity forces them to experience the same anxiety and uncertainty that they typically create in their partners. This role reversal provides them with first-hand understanding of how it feels to love someone who doesn't reciprocate fully, often generating empathy and motivation for greater emotional investment. The strategic withdrawal: how to create authentic emotional scarcity. Creating effective emotional scarcity requires systematic and authentic withdrawal of your love, attention, and emotional investment in ways that feel genuine rather than manipulative. This withdrawal must stem from genuine recognition that their current emotional availability doesn't meet your needs, rather than strategic maneuvering designed to control their behavior. Complete communication reduction serves as the foundation of emotional scarcity, involving dramatic decreases in your initiation of contact, shortened responses to their communications, and elimination of emotional content from your interactions. Your messages become purely practical and logistical, stripping away the warmth and personal connection that previously characterized your communication style. Emotional labor withdrawal represents another crucial component where you stop providing the emotional support, validation, and care that they've grown accustomed to receiving. This includes ending your role as their emotional processor, problem solver, and mood regulator, forcing them to manage their emotional needs independently or seek support elsewhere. Physical affection and intimacy reduction creates tangible scarcity that they cannot ignore or rationalize away. The absence of physical touch, sexual connection, and intimate moments forces them to confront the loss of comfort and pleasure they previously took for granted, while highlighting the value of physical connection. Priority shifts become visible as you begin investing your time and energy in other people and activities that provide greater satisfaction and reciprocal investment. Your social calendar fills with friends, family, and activities that don't include them, demonstrating that your happiness doesn't depend on their presence or attention. Emotional expression cessation involves stopping your declarations of love, expressions of appreciation, and verbal affirmations that previously provided them with consistent validation and security. The absence of these emotional gifts forces them to question whether your feelings have changed and whether they still hold importance in your emotional landscape. Future planning exclusion becomes apparent as you begin making decisions and plans without considering their input or presence. This practical demonstration that you're building a life that doesn't depend on their participation forces them to confront their irrelevance to your future happiness and goals. Attention redirection involves visibly investing your emotional energy in other people and pursuits while providing minimal attention to their needs, interests, or emotional state. This shift in focus demonstrates that they're no longer your primary emotional priority and must compete for the attention they previously received automatically. The authenticity of your withdrawal is crucial because avoidants can typically sense manipulation and strategic behavior. Your emotional scarcity must stem from genuine recognition that the relationship doesn't serve your well-being, rather than calculated attempts to control their responses or behavior. The stages of their response, from confusion to desperation. When you systematically starve an avoidant of your love, their response typically follows predictable stages that escalate in intensity as they gradually comprehend the seriousness of your withdrawal and the potential permanence of their loss. Understanding these stages helps you recognize their psychological progression while maintaining your emotional boundaries. Stage 1 involves initial confusion and mild concern, as they notice changes in your behavior but haven't yet grasped the significance of your withdrawal. They may attribute your distance to temporary stress, mood changes, or external circumstances rather than recognizing it as a fundamental shift in your relationship investment. During this stage, they often maintain their usual emotional distance while occasionally testing to see if your withdrawal is temporary. Stage 2 brings recognition that your changes are sustained and intentional rather than temporary fluctuations in your mood or availability. They begin to realize that you're consistently less emotionally available, less physically affectionate, and less invested in maintaining connection. This recognition often triggers mild anxiety as they lose their sense of control over relationship dynamics and your emotional state. Stage 3 involves attempts to restore the previous dynamic through increased attention, temporary emotional availability, or strategic behaviors designed to regain your interest and investment. They may become more communicative, offer activities you enjoy, or display emotional availability they previously withheld. However, these efforts are typically temporary and motivated by their discomfort rather than genuine change. Stage 4 emerges when their attempts to restore normalcy fail and they begin to panic about the potential permanence of your emotional withdrawal. They realize that their usual strategies for managing relationship dynamics aren't working and that you've genuinely shifted your emotional investment away from them. This stage often includes increased pursuit behaviors and attempts to understand what caused your changes. Stage 5 involves desperation as they confront the possibility that they may permanently lose access to your love and attention. Their anxiety escalates as they realize that you're not just temporarily distant, but have genuinely begun to detach emotionally. This desperation often motivates unprecedented levels of emotional expression, romantic gestures, and promises of change. Stage 6 represents their most intense pursuit phase, as they abandon their usual emotional defenses and engage in behaviors that directly contradict their typical avoidant patterns. They may become emotionally expressive, pursue you actively, make future commitments they previously avoided, or display vulnerability they typically suppress. The timeline for these stages varies based on the depth of their attachment to you, their awareness of relationship dynamics, and the consistency of your withdrawal. Some avoidants progress through these stages rapidly when faced with clear emotional scarcity, while others may remain in early stages for extended periods before fully comprehending the implications of your withdrawal. The intensity of their response at each stage often depends on how much they valued what you provided and how difficult they find it to replace your emotional support, physical affection, and companionship with alternative sources. Avoidants who relied heavily on you for emotional regulation and security typically progress through these stages more quickly and intensely. The craving response, when they realize what they've lost. The psychological craving that emerges when avoidants realize they've lost access to your love operates on the same neurochemical pathways as addiction withdrawal, creating intense psychological hunger for what they can no longer access. This craving often surprises them with its intensity because they previously believed they were emotionally independent and didn't need your love for their well-being. The craving typically begins with intrusive thoughts about you and the relationship that interrupt their daily activities and concentration. They find themselves thinking about you during work, remembering positive moments from your relationship, and wondering about your current emotional state and activities. These thoughts feel involuntary and overwhelming because they contrast sharply with their usual ability to suppress emotional concerns. Physical symptoms often accompany their psychological craving, including sleep disturbances, appetite changes, concentration difficulties, and general restlessness that they cannot attribute to other life circumstances. These symptoms force them to confront that losing access to your love has created genuine psychological and physical distress that affects their overall functioning. Memory idealization becomes prominent as they begin to focus obsessively on positive aspects of your relationship while minimizing or forgetting the emotional demands that originally triggered their withdrawal. This selective memory process makes your love feel more valuable and irreplaceable than it did when it was freely available. Comparison behaviors emerge as they attempt to find replacement sources for the emotional support, physical affection, and companionship you provided. However, these comparisons typically highlight the unique qualities you offered and the difficulty of finding someone else willing to provide similar emotional investment while tolerating their avoidant patterns. The craving often includes specific missing elements: your particular way of showing affection, your understanding of their personality, your willingness to accommodate their emotional limitations, or your specific physical and emotional presence. These specific cravings make finding adequate replacements feel impossible and increase their desperation to regain access to you. Social media monitoring becomes compulsive as they seek information about your emotional state, activities, and potential romantic interests. This monitoring represents their attempt to maintain some form of connection and assess whether opportunities for reconciliation still exist. But it often increases their craving by providing evidence of your independence and happiness without them. Their craving typically includes fantasy scenarios about reunion, reconciliation, or regaining your love that provide temporary psychological relief while maintaining their attachment to you. These fantasies often involve imagining how they would behave differently if given another chance, or what they would say to convince you to reinvest in the relationship. The intensity of their craving often surprises them because it contradicts their self-image as emotionally independent people who don't need others for their happiness. This surprise forces them to confront that they may have been deceiving themselves about their emotional needs and the importance of your relationship in their psychological well-being. The pursuit phase, when starvation motivates action. When emotional starvation becomes unbearable and their craving reaches critical intensity, many avoidants enter an active pursuit phase where they abandon their usual emotional distance and engage in behaviors designed to regain access to your love and attention. This pursuit often feels surreal to former partners because it contradicts everything the avoidant previously demonstrated about their capacity for romantic effort and emotional expression. Direct communication escalates dramatically as they begin reaching out with increased frequency and emotional intensity. Their messages often include expressions of missing you, appreciation for what you provided, and requests for conversational contact that represent unprecedented emotional vulnerability. This communication typically exceeds anything they provided during the actual relationship in terms of emotional content and frequency. Grand gesture behaviors emerge as they attempt to demonstrate the depth of their feelings and their commitment to regaining your attention. These gestures might include surprise visits, expensive gifts, public declarations of their feelings, or other dramatic actions designed to prove that their feelings are genuine and that they're willing to invest effort they previously withheld. Promise-making becomes prominent as they offer everything you previously requested from them: emotional availability, future planning, public acknowledgement of the relationship, and commitment to addressing their avoidant patterns. These promises often include specific behavioral changes, therapeutic commitments, or lifestyle modifications designed to address the issues that led to your emotional withdrawal. Vulnerability displays represent perhaps the most dramatic change in their behavior as they begin sharing emotions, fears, and insecurities they typically keep hidden. This emotional transparency often exceeds anything they provided during your relationship and represents their desperate attempt to create the intimacy they previously avoided. Persistence escalates as they refuse to accept your continued emotional distance and pursue you through multiple channels and methods. This persistence may include repeated communication attempts, enlisting mutual friends to advocate for them, or showing up at places where they expect to encounter you. Competition behaviors often emerge when they realize that your emotional withdrawal might lead to your interest in other people. The possibility that someone else might gain access to your love triggers possessive responses that contradict their usual indifference to your romantic life and their stated preference for independence. Identity reformation may accompany their pursuit as they attempt to demonstrate that they've become a different person who can meet your emotional needs. This might involve dramatic lifestyle changes, new social circles, different career paths, or other modifications designed to prove their transformation and worthiness of your renewed investment. Negotiation tactics appear as they attempt to bargain their way back into your emotional consideration by offering specific concessions or changes in exchange for renewed contact. This willingness to negotiate represents a complete reversal of their previous need to control relationship terms and demonstrates their desperation to regain access to you. The timing and intensity of their pursuit often depend on how effectively you maintain your emotional withdrawal and how much they valued what you provided. Consistent emotional scarcity typically motivates more intense pursuit than intermittent withdrawal because it eliminates their hope that your distance is temporary or manageable. The psychological transformation, how starvation changes them. The experience of being starved of love often creates fundamental psychological changes in avoidance that extend beyond their feelings about you to their overall approach to relationships and emotional vulnerability. This transformation occurs because emotional starvation forces them to confront aspects of themselves and their needs that they've spent their lives avoiding. Attachment recognition emerges as they're forced to acknowledge that they do have genuine emotional needs and that their independence was partially illusory. The intensity of their response to losing your love contradicts their self-concept as emotionally self-sufficient people and forces them to confront that they may have been deceiving themselves about their emotional requirements. Empathy development often occurs as they experience firsthand the anxiety, uncertainty, and emotional pain that they typically create in their partners through their inconsistent availability and emotional withdrawal. This role reversal provides them with understanding of how their behavior affects others and may motivate more considerate treatment of future partners. Value reassessment happens as they're forced to recognize the worth of emotional qualities they previously dismissed or took for granted. Your patience, understanding, emotional availability, and unconditional acceptance become precious commodities that they now understand are rare and valuable rather than weaknesses or character flaws. Fear confrontation becomes necessary as they must face their deepest anxieties about vulnerability, rejection, and emotional dependency to pursue what they want. The motivation to regain your love often outweighs their usual fear of emotional exposure, forcing them to develop courage they didn't know they possessed. Communication skill development may emerge from necessity as they attempt to express emotions and needs they've never articulated before. The urgency of their situation often motivates them to learn emotional expression skills that they avoided developing during your relationship. Priority restructuring occurs as they realize that their preference for independence and emotional distance may have cost them something irreplaceable. This recognition often leads to fundamental changes in what they value and pursue in relationships and life generally. Self-awareness increases as they examine their own behavior patterns and their role in creating their current situation. The pain of potentially losing you forever often motivates honest self-reflection that they previously avoided through emotional suppression and external blame. The permanence of these changes varies significantly based on their fundamental character, their commitment to personal growth, and whether they receive support for sustained change, rather than just temporary motivation to regain your attention. Some avoidants use the crisis of losing you as motivation for genuine personal development, while others may revert to previous patterns once they feel secure about regaining your attention. The dangers and limitations, what you must understand. While starving an avoidant of your love can trigger intense pursuit and apparent transformation, it's crucial to understand the significant dangers and limitations of this approach to maintain realistic expectations and protect your own emotional well-being throughout the process. The primary danger involves the possibility that your withdrawal will not motivate pursuit, but will instead result in permanent separation as they choose to accept the loss rather than face the vulnerability that pursuit requires. Some avoidants have such strong defensive systems that they prefer permanent loss to emotional risk, making your withdrawal potentially final. Manipulation risks exist because creating emotional scarcity as a strategy to control their behavior represents a form of emotional manipulation that can damage your own character and integrity. If your withdrawal isn't based on genuine recognition that the relationship doesn't serve your needs, you're essentially using psychological tactics to control another person's emotions and behavior. Their pursuit may be motivated by attachment panic rather than genuine change, meaning that their increased attention and emotional availability could disappear once they feel secure about regaining your love. The intensity of their response during pursuit doesn't necessarily predict their capacity for sustained emotional availability during normal relationship dynamics. Boundary violations often escalate when avoidants become desperate to regain your attention, potentially including stalking behaviors, harassment through mutual friends, or other intrusive actions that make you feel unsafe or uncomfortable. Their desperation can override their usual respect for social conventions and personal boundaries. The transformation you observe during their pursuit phase may not represent lasting change, but rather temporary behavior modification motivated by crisis. Many avoidants can access emotional intensity during emergency periods while remaining unable to maintain that availability during routine relationship functioning. Your own emotional well-being may suffer as you maintain emotional distance from someone you care about while witnessing their distress. The process of deliberately withholding love can create internal conflict and guilt that affects your own mental health and relationship patterns. Timing risks exist because the approach requires sustained commitment over extended periods to be effective. If you break your emotional withdrawal too early, you may reinforce their belief that your distance is temporary and manageable rather than a serious shift in your investment. Most importantly, the goal should be your own emotional protection and healthy relationship standards rather than controlling their behavior or emotions. Your withdrawal should stem from authentic recognition that they cannot meet your needs, rather than strategic maneuvering designed to make them pursue you. The ultimate truth, what this reveals about love and attachment. The effectiveness of starving avoidance of love to trigger their pursuit reveals fundamental truths about human psychology, attachment patterns, and the nature of desire that extend beyond specific relationship dynamics to broader understanding of how people value and pursue connection. The principle demonstrates that human beings, including those who claim emotional independence, typically value what they cannot easily access more than what is freely available. This scarcity psychology applies not just to avoidance, but to most people in various life contexts, revealing universal tendencies about desire and motivation. The approach exposes the reality that many avoidants are capable of much greater emotional expression and romantic effort than they typically demonstrate, suggesting that their emotional limitations are often choices rather than unchangeable characteristics. Their pursuit behavior reveals emotional capacity that exists but remains unused during normal relationship circumstances. The transformation that emotional starvation can trigger indicates that crisis and potential loss sometimes motivate personal growth more effectively than security and acceptance. While this doesn't justify creating artificial crises, it suggests that some people require significant motivation to examine their patterns and develop greater emotional capacity. The attachment patterns revealed through this process demonstrate that even highly avoidant individuals retain fundamental human needs for connection and love that emerge under sufficient pressure. Their pursuit behavior reveals that their emotional detachment is often defensive rather than an authentic lack of attachment capacity. However, the approach also reveals the limitations of trying to create lasting change through external pressure rather than internal motivation. While crisis can trigger temporary transformation, sustainable change typically requires ongoing personal commitment rather than external circumstances that motivated initial growth. Most importantly, the effectiveness of this approach underscores the importance of maintaining your own emotional standards and boundaries regardless of others' attachment patterns. Whether starving them of love triggers their pursuit or results in permanent separation, your commitment to relationships that honor your emotional needs serves your long-term well-being and attracts partners capable of appreciating what you offer. Understanding these dynamics empowers you to make informed decisions about when to invest emotional energy in people who can reciprocate consistently versus when to redirect that energy toward relationships that naturally provide the mutual respect and emotional availability that healthy partnerships require.